just to give you some context of this study, so as we are all painfully aware, is that we all have to deal at the moment with the COVID-19 crisis. And this poses adversity to many families all over the world. And most families in the course of this have also been confronted with school closures and with subsequent homeschooling, such as, for example, at the moment here in Holland, for the second time. But the threat that is posed by these school closures to children's educational development is probably not equal across families. Some families will be better able to adapt to this crisis and keep functioning, although they encounter adversity, and these families we call resilient. And these are really interesting families because we can learn from them. So what makes them resilient? How can they keep functioning, and how can they adapt to the adversity? And when we look at resilience, we have to basically look at two different things. One is the encountered risk and the adaptation to those risks. And the second part is protective factors that may enhance adaptation to the adversity. And that is also what we want to look at in this study about homeschooling. This is our conceptual model. Don't worry, I will take you through this step by step. It's important to mention that we want to look at different parts of homeschooling, which are presented here. Can you see my cursor? I'm not sure. Okay. We also want to look at risk factors that are associated with these different aspects of homeschooling. And then I'm talking mainly about contextual risk. And we want to examine the protective factors, which are related to home-based parental involvement prior to the crisis. We studied this in Generation Square, which is a prospective cohort study here in Amsterdam. And the study included 2,000 women who were pregnant with their first child in a period between 2009 and 2013. So all these children are in school age now and are more or less affected by the school closures. Within the study, we had several assessment waves, 3 in pregnancy, 2 within the first year of life, and then afterwards 3 more assessments. And this really gives us the opportunity to look into family factors that have been present before this crisis, and if this can tell us something about how well they are doing during this crisis. Then from August to November 2020, we had another assessment wave, which was focused on how families deal with the COVID-19 crisis. So this already tells you, we collected data until end of November. So all the results that I present to you are very preliminary. So it's really, we analyzed until last week, Friday, and we're not done yet. So any feedback or tips that you have later on are highly appreciated. We included so far 543 parents. Most of them are mothers. And the children, which are the firstborn children of these mothers, are about 9 years old. So the first question that we were trying to answer in this study is, how did families organize and experience homeschooling during the COVID-19 lockdown? And when I'm talking about lockdown, I mean the first lockdown, which was going on approximately from March till June 2020, when the schools were closed for the first time. There are different aspects that we wanted to look at. So we wanted to look at how much time did they spend on homeschooling, so the quantity of homeschooling. Wanted also to look at the quality of homeschooling, so how well was it going? We wanted to examine how parents and also children experienced homeschooling. And finally, one thing that interested us was parenting self-efficacy in the school context, because that has been shown to be an important factor also in learning of children. And this Parenting self-efficacy in the school context is defined as parental belief that they can make a difference for the children's learning if they are involved in the learning process at home. Here you see a couple of just descriptive data about the homeschooling quantity, just to give you an impression about how much work families put in. In our study, children spent about 3.7 hours a day on the schoolwork at home, and parents spent about 3 hours supervising the schoolwork, and that is for all the children in the home. Next to that, parents also worked, and our parents, or the parents in our study, worked about 25 hours a week. And we saw a big difference there between women and their partners, where partners worked more than 30 hours and women worked more closely to 20 hours a week. My slides are not moving. What's going on? There we go. Homeschooling quality was a little bit less straightforward for us to look at. We had 16 items that tapped into that, and we did a principal component analysis of these items, and we extracted 5 factors. So we found a factor that relates to parent support and availability, that is related mostly to how well parents were able to support their children with the schoolwork, and also including, for example, talking about the feelings regarding schoolwork. We found one factor related to management and discipline, which has mostly to do with having rules, having schemes, and implying these rules. Home, workplace, and materials was mostly about are parents able to provide all the materials that the children need for making the schoolwork. Then we had a factor about knowledge and skills, which was about these 2 things. So did parents feel able to support the children with their homework? And finally, we had a negative factor, frustration, which had to do with frustrations that were related to children's behavior with regard to the homeschooling. So when we look at quality, we found here that it's not really about high or low quality, but that there are possibly different aspects to quality of homeschooling. Then how did parents experience the homeschooling? We looked at a couple of different things, and we asked parents to rate on a scale from 1 to 10, so following the Dutch grading system, where 1 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. And here you can see that it's really varied how parents experience it. So we have all scores ranging from 1 to 10 regarding to how well they were able to combine homeschooling for several children. Which looked to be going quite well, but there was also a lot of stress reported by the parents. But at the same time, parents also reported that they found it somehow gratifying to do the homeschooling for their children. And maybe that's the reason why also life satisfaction during homeschooling was quite high. With regard to children's experience, we asked the parents if they thought the children preferred going to school, preferred homeschooling, or didn't have a preference. And here parents thought, or most of the parents thought, that the children would prefer to go to school. And that was in the first lockdown. With regard to motivation, we see again big variation. So children who were completely unmotivated according to the parents, but also children who were highly motivated. And if you look at the distribution, I would say, child motivation was also quite high on average. Finally, we looked at the parenting self-efficacy. So did parents think that they actually made a difference in learning by being involved in the learning process at home? And as you can see here, the mean score was also quite high, so 4.4 on a scale from 1 to 6. So parents, on average, thought that they could make a difference by this. Moving to the results of the second question, which was about, so do contextual risk factors tell us something about differences in these homeschooling variables? We looked at migration background, educational level, working hours, and number of children. So basically factors that could increase stress in the situation and therefore could be considered additional risk factors. Here you see a table where the distribution of these risk factors in our sample are shown. And as you can see, most of our parents, so 86% were without migration background, so naturally Dutch. Then most of the parents were highly educated, had either a university or an HBO or higher education degree. And most of the families had 1, 2, or 3 children. With regard to the working situation, about 44% of the parents worked from home during the first lockdown, but also there was quite a big group who still went to work at the normal location. When we looked at differences in these contextual risk factors, we basically saw very few associations with the homeschooling variables. So there was no difference between people with or without a migration background. Educational level only was related to knowledge and skills. Working situation was not related to any of the homeschooling variables. What we did see was that more working hours was related to lower support that parents could offer, which I think makes sense, and more children in the household resulted in more hours that parents spent in homeschooling. There were some interesting gender differences, but I will skip that for now. So I get to all the other findings. So with regard to the contextual variables, we didn't see a lot of associations with the homeschooling variables that we looked at, but child preferences and motivation were related mostly to homeschooling quality variables. So we compared children who preferred school to children who preferred homeschooling, and we saw that in the children who preferred school, parents reported lower homeschooling quality on a couple of scales, and also lower parenting self-efficacy. Also, children who preferred school were reported to be less motivated for homeschooling, which of course also makes sense. In addition, child motivation was also related to higher quality of homeschooling, almost all scales, and lower parental frustration, and also a more positive parental experience of homeschooling. Then the last question that we wanted to answer is, and how far can we identify protective factors from prior to the lockdown that may affect homeschooling during the lockdown? And there we look mainly at home-based parental involvement and again, self-efficacy in the school context measured when children were 4 years old. We looked at the quantity of home-based parental involvement in learning and also at the style. And this is maybe a little bit much information, so I will keep it there. This is a lot of text. Basically, what we found was that parent involvement at home when children were 4 years old were related to a lot of the scales that we use for measuring homeschooling environment. And mainly, you see here, what pops up a lot is the scale about support and availability. Also, one thing I would like to mention is that the parenting self-efficacy in the school context was related to higher quality of homeschooling and also to lower frustration and also to higher parental self-efficacy during the lockdown. So summarizing the findings with regard to the experiences, we saw that homeschooling experiences during the first lockdown were very diverse and that the majority of the children preferred going to school, at least according to the parents. Contextual risk factors were not strongly related to homeschooling quantity, quality, and experiences of homeschooling, and but child preferences and motivation were. Finally, parental previous involvement in children's learning was positively related to specific aspects of homeschooling quality, so that could be considered a protective factor. And then, like I said, very preliminary, so we have to do some more work, for example, doing path models and repeating these analyses where we can take into account that we have both mothers and partners reports, so they're reporting about the same children. So data are related, and we can take that into account in other kind of models. Finally, a big thank you to all the participants and the research team of Generation Square, and also to Learn, who supported the COVID-19 assessment wave within Generations.